Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. You're watching Alaska Weather with us on this 25th of November. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information. A lot to pass on to you tonight. All of this can be seen on weather.gov/Alaska, and a lot of the images that you'll see here are always on the Alaska Weather TV show link at the bottom of that page. You can get your local forecast information by calling 1-800-472-0391. And as always, if you can't find what you're looking for, I am happy to serve you any way I possibly can. Simply email me at david.snider@noaa.gov, and I'll reply just as quickly as I can. We've got a lot of watches, warnings, and advisories to pass on to you. First of all, a watch means watch out. Weather isn't here yet, but it's something you should be aware of, and it is possible that the weather may form. If a watch turns into an advisory or a warning, that means the weather is occurring or about to occur, and it's time to take action. But a watch is simply the preliminary notice that the weather is changing and it might get in your way, cause damage, or cause harm to you and yours. We do have high wind watches out across the upper Kuskokwim all the way to the eastern Alaska Range. This is a notice that we are going to have some stronger winds coming up. This will be more for Wednesday and into Thursday. A winter storm watch is posted for the upper Kuskokwim, 12 to 18 inches of snow, up to 24 in some places there. And again, that'll be into Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. So wind and snow here. This is a little bit later in the week. But let's go out to the Bristol Bay communities and also around the lower Kuskokwim. There, a coastal flood advisory is in effect, and that'll go until about 6 p.m. tomorrow. And for areas north of Cape Newenham, that'll go until early Tuesday morning. The problem is that we have a lot of southwesterly winds coming into the west coast, and that'll be true up a little bit further north as well. But first, the coastal flood advisory here means that we're looking about 2 to 4 feet above normal high tide north of Cape Newenham through tomorrow morning, and into the lower Kuskokwim for areas generally in the 4 to 7 feet above normal high tide. That'll go through Tuesday night. So coastal flood advisories here generally north of Cape Newenham all the way up to Kuskokwim Delta. It gets worse the further north you go. So let's take a look at that. The first thing is we have coastal flood warnings really from the Chukchi coast all the way into parts of Kotzebue Sound, down the southern Seward Peninsula coastline through the eastern Norton Sound and the Yukon Delta. And there's just no way I have enough time to read every single one of those locations with the forecast for the normal high tide. So I encourage you to listen to your NOAA weather radio and get more information in that way for your specific community's needs. Many communities have been briefed by the National Weather Service Forecast Office in Fairbanks already, so check in with your local community officials. But a coastal flood warning is posted for just about all of the coastal areas here, touching the Bering Sea and touching the Chukchi Sea. And in this case, eastern Norton Sound, you're looking at water levels up about 4 to 7 feet above normal high tide. The Yukon Delta about 4 to 6 feet above normal high tide. The southern Seward Peninsula coastline, 6 to 8 feet above normal high tide. That's some of the worst there. The Chukchi coast, 3 to 5 feet above normal high tide. And that's also going to really impact places like Kivalina, again with strong southeasterly winds for all of these communities. Blowing up to about 65 miles per hour at times, so really strong stuff. The northern Arctic coast also looking at a coastal flood warning, 2.5 to about 3.5 feet above normal high tide for you, and areas around St. Lawrence Island and the Bering Strait also looking for a high surf advisory there. 16-foot breakers offshore will still cause some pretty choppy run up there onto your beach, so beach and coastal erosion possible. And really all of these communities, but a coastal flood warning in effect for the ones that I've already mentioned there. Now, obviously the red color is pushed inland around the Brooks Range into the upper Koyukuk and the upper Kobuk and Noatak valleys and parts of the lower and middle Yukon. These are winter storm warnings, so in this case they're all warnings, but they mean slightly different things, so pardon the confusion there. But we do have mostly winter storm warnings now for most of the inland areas, and again the snow is going to come in 2 waves. The first wave is bringing the strong wind up the coast and some snow, And then the second wave is going to bring a lot more snow toward the mid part of the week, and also some wind as you get into the Alaska Range. For many of these locations now, from Ambler to Bettles to Galena, all the way down to Grayling, and including the coastal areas in the southern Seward Peninsula and the interior, we're talking about as much as 3 to 6, maybe 10 inches of snow. The southeastern Brooks Range here, you could be looking at up to 20 inches of snow. In the upper Koyukuk Valley, you're talking about 8 to 15, as much as 24. So there's a very wide range in the amounts of snow, but it is going to snow. It's going to come down hard and fast as we get into Tuesday and Wednesday. And then that pattern is going to gradually shift from west to east. So be prepared for changing winter conditions for coastal areas. It does look like there will be a significant threat for waves coming up on the beach and coastal flooding to occur above what is typically normal, thanks to that strong southeast wind that in many places will be gusting up to 65 miles per hour. So again, I encourage you to look online, listen to your NOAA weather radio, and check in with your community officials for a lot more specific information for your villages. Let's take a look at the satellite picture, and we'll run through this really quickly so I can show you the other weather maps here. Here is that strong southwest push that's coming in ahead of a cold front, a powerful area of low pressure here east of Anadir. And as this is working its way toward the west coast, we're already seeing snow, we're already seeing wind, a lot of cold air poised and ready to drop in south. And this is all working in ahead of that very dry and cold air that's worked into south central and parts of southeastern Alaska, with high pressure setting in across western parts of British Columbia. Now, here's the low right now, a 969 millibar low. It is a storm force low. It has a tremendous amount of wind out in front of it, and it's drawing in wind up along the southeastern or southwestern coast, I should say. And areas of snow have formed there, areas of fog inland, as high pressure is trying to stabilize things, but it will lose the battle as the high travels eastward. It will make room for the low pressure system to get a lot closer and really start to impact parts of the coastline. Now, as we go into tonight, watch for areas of snow showers way out across the western Bering Sea. High pressure is working its way into the western Gulf, and this whole ridge is kind of leaning off to the east. That's going to make room for this strong fetch of moisture to work its way into southwestern Alaska, with the potential for coastal flooding. And we'll probably see some mixed precipitation as this wave passes through. Might be a little bit of freezing rain mixed in there as well. But the primary concern is going to be a pretty strong burst of snow working its way through the Yukon Delta, the lower Yukon, the eastern Norton Sound, Seward Peninsula, both north and south sides, and into parts of Kotzebue Sound and the western Arctic coast. You'll notice a few areas of light snow across the central and eastern interior. That's probably not going to be a significant threat at all. Across southeast, we expect to see some pockets of snow here. Again, nothing too significant. I think what's going to be more significant for you in the long term this week is that very strong high pressure system across western Canada that is pushing wind over and through the mountains and into the gaps. You'll likely have some strong and gusty winds, but nothing that is reaching a high wind warning or a Taku wind alert for you just yet. High pressure is going to move out across the central Gulf as we get into Tuesday at 1,034 millibars. Notice the very tight packing of the pressure gradient here across western and interior Alaska. Several waves of low pressure will be traveling up the main front as that works in from the western Bering Sea. And that's going to keep the wind going, that'll keep the snow going, and the moisture is feeding right into this. So there's really no significant stop to this as we get from Monday night into early Wednesday morning. So a lot of snow, and a lot of that really focused on the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range, and likely some of our other local hills and foothills that we have in west and southwestern Alaska. That's also really going to play a significant part into bringing up the water potential there for southern parts of the Seward Peninsula and areas that have a southern exposure, including places like Kivalina, and again, Nome all the way out into the eastern sections of Norton Sound. So again, pay close attention to that. Behind that, another wave of colder air dropping southward. That is going to give us another little punch of snow as we work into the latter part of the week. In the meantime, we're setting the stage for snow across the Alaska Range and wind to really come up. And wind gusts there again could be upwards of 55 to 65 miles per hour as we get into the Wednesday and Thursday time frame. For your Alaska Range passes, high wind watches again still posted for the upper Kuskokwim as we go through Wednesday. A quick check of your temperatures here. There's a lot of information, so I apologize for the rush. As we look in southeast, 20s and 30s there, south central, down to about 4 tonight. 3 in Talkeetna, 1 below in Fairbanks, and you're looking at temperatures anywhere from 5 to 15 below across the northern Arctic coast. 23 in Nome, and Overnight lows probably in the lower to mid 30s tonight, so mild for the Alaska Peninsula and Southwest. As we get into the daytime tomorrow, again with that winter weather setting in, a lot of wind here in the west, so not a big temperature change, but we will see that warmth spread northward though. That's the most significant part. Temps go up into the lower 30s around Norton Sound, Kivalina, Kotzebue in the 20s. Teens for the northern Arctic coast. It's still very cold across the eastern interior. Many places anywhere from 5 to 15 below. 11 in Fairbanks, 22 in Kenai, 19 in Anchorage with southeast in the 30s.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
And on to aviation weather now. IFR will certainly slam into the west coast ahead of that next wave of weather. It's going to bring snow and ceilings down and probably some blowing snow for local airports as well. MVFR conditions across the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range will kind of be the leader in pushing visibilities down a little bit, and that may start to affect your passes fairly quickly. Hit and miss across the interior, but no real big shenanigans going on across the interior, at least initially, because all the active weather is going to be out here in the west with the moisture and the poor ceiling and visibility. Watch for hit and miss marginal conditions across the eastern Gulf and into southern parts of southeast and all along the windward side of the Alaska Peninsula and the Aleutians. As we go into the afternoon, you'll notice that kind of creeping its way north and east, but pulling away from southern parts of southeast. So it looks like we'll see more activity out here in the Gulf, but the big concern will be for IFR conditions all the way from Nunivak Island and Makoriak into parts of Lake Iliamna, the upper Kuskokwim, and then snaking its way up the Koyukuk and into the middle Yukon Valley. And then you'll notice the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range again filling in with IFR where we'd already seen marginal conditions there. That should worsen throughout the day. And across the Chukchi Coast, watch for hit and miss, MVFR and IFR concerns. Getting into Wednesday morning, the first front should be ashore here, and the next wave is still back to the west, and that's where we're starting to pick up another band of IFR developing across the western Bering. So the main focus will be for IFR across the Kobuk and Noatak valleys, all the way east into the middle Yukon Valley, and then southward into the upper Kuskokwim and parts of the Alaska Range. We'll start to see IFR developing across the northern parts of Prince William Sound and into the Kenai Fjords region. Cook Inlet looking at marginal conditions, and IFR setting into the Susitna Valley. Southeast still looking okay. VFR expected throughout Wednesday morning. As we get into the afternoon, that remains true, but you'll start to see more marginal conditions creeping your way into northern parts of the Gulf, including maybe very close to Yakutat. IFR is expected to settle into the Yukon Flats, and again, the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range will get hit hard with snow and wind, and visibility and ceiling should come down all the way down to the southwestern Capes, all the way up the Alaska Range, and again, the Kenai Fjords region, Portage Pass, western Prince William Sound, all the way down to Sand Point, looking at IFR, with some breaks developing around St. Paul and St. George for a change. Here's a look at your pass conditions now for detail. On Tuesday, Anaktuvuk and Adigan Pass, we expect to lean over toward IFR as the day goes on in both places there. We'll start with marginal conditions, but IFR should set in by the afternoon, it looks like, as snow starts to fall. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass looking at marginal weather, heading over to IFR as we get into the afternoon. And Randy Pass may start at VFR, but we do think that'll push over into marginal conditions by the end of the day. Windy Pass and Isabel Pass and probably Mentasta Pass look to be A-OK at this point. All the weather's going to be well to your west. Tanita Pass also looking pretty good if you want to sneak out east. Portage Pass, VFR conditions are expected throughout the day. That's going to be a lot different as we get toward the mid part of the week. And Chilkoot and White Pass at this point looking to be VFR. Freezing levels, no doubt about it. The temperature in Ambler and Bettles is about the same as what we're seeing in South Central this afternoon. It's cold stuff out there, and because of such, the surface freezing line is sitting out across south and western Alaska, and that's simply because there's still some warm air out here across the Bering. You'll notice that snaking its way out across the central and southern parts of southeast, but aloft, levels there, 2, 4, and 6,000 foot levels still hanging out across the Alaska Peninsula all the way up to about St. Paul. So cold air over a large part of the 49th today and again tomorrow. Icing potential is elevated, in fact considerable moderate all the way from Point Barrow through the interior, the west coast, south and west of the Yukon and Kuskokwim Delta and into the central and eastern chain. Most of this is above about 5,000 to 6,000 feet for the core. Out to the west and on the fringes here, it's above about 3,000 feet. And then around South Central above about 3,000 feet there. But there are some considerable moderate areas to be aware of. Certainly as that front is working through, will drive that initial icing potential. Low pressure across the Pacific Northwest and the western Canada is allowing a ridge of high pressure to form across the Gulf and into the interior. Wind speeds preceding the next trough here are really ramped up, 100 to 140 knots or so coming in from the south and west, and then of course that northwesterly flow is allowing the cold air to take over most of Alaska. You can see it strengthening here. We're going to have widespread turbulence, I think, across the west for the next couple days, mainly looking at those 50 knotters coming in from the south and west over western Alaska, 70 knots over Nome, and southerly strong going off the Arctic coast. Northwesterly is also a little choppy across southeast. Not a big pattern change here at 3,000 feet. A high-pressure ridge sitting across the eastern Gulf. Southwesterly is strong, anywhere from 40 to 50 knots across a large part of western Alaska. So this is, don't focus on the red spots exactly where they are, but in general, the west coast looking at widespread considerable and at least some isolated severe, generally below 4,000 feet tomorrow. Thanks for joining us for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider, and joining us today is Eric Stevens from GINA, the Geographic Information Network of Alaska at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. Thank you for joining us, Eric.
My pleasure, Dave.
Thank you. And you're joining us here to talk a little bit more about satellites and how satellites work, and especially one neat feature that's working over Alaska right now. What is that?
Well, there's a lot of weather satellites and a lot of instruments on these satellites, and there are new generations going up and new instruments. This includes something called the day-night band, which is not a cover band at the local bar, but it's a new satellite that is very useful, especially here in Alaska, especially in the winter.
In the wintertime, yeah, that makes it a little bit hard to use some of the normal tools that we associate with weather satellite imagery.
Right. You know, one of the classic weather satellite instruments is just visible light. What would the human eye see if you were riding on a weather satellite yourself and looked down and it was black and white? You'd see the clouds reflecting the sunlight. And we've got an example from the Pacific Ocean. There's a geostationary satellite, and we can see that the eastern side of the image is in daylight. The western side, it's night over there, so you don't see anything because there's no sunlight over there. And visible imagery, it's very intuitive. You see the clouds just like you see them standing on the ground, but now you're a satellite seeing them from above. But the problem is, what about the night side of the planet? How do you track the storms? How do you know where the rain is, the snow, the weather, if you can't see the clouds? And that's why, just like a television can change from one channel to another, or a radio can change stations, satellites can change the frequency of the electromagnetic spectrum that they're looking at. We can go to infrared instead of visible light. You know, it's heat energy. You can see heat, and we've got another satellite picture from the same time, same satellite, out over the Pacific Ocean. That's the infrared side, and we're seeing temperature there. And even at night, when there's no light, everything still has a temperature.
So we're sensing something with a thermometer instead of perhaps the visible side of that, is what you're saying?
That's right. On this depiction, colder features are lighter shades, warmer features are dark. And so clouds tend to be colder than the ground. Clouds are higher in the atmosphere, it's cooler. And so that very same image on the western, or the left-hand side of the globe, now we can see the clouds there, even though it's nighttime, because we're seeing the temperatures. And one nice feature is that tropical storm there, just in the middle of the northern hemisphere there, hurricane or typhoon, depending on...
That's that swirly part that we see in the middle of the image?
There you go. You can even see the eye on it there, especially in the infrared image. So we've got two kinds of imagery there from the same satellite, different instruments, you know, different channels like on a television, visible and infrared. You know, it turns out there's no one magic tool. Each has its strengths, each has its flaws, weaknesses. The visible is nice, it's intuitive, it's easy to understand, but doesn't work at night. Infrared is nice, it works at night, you can see temperatures, but there is a catch. What if your clouds and the nearby bare ground or open water, what if those were about the same temperature?
Oh, that's going to be hard to figure out what's going on.
If you can only see temperature and you have two features that are the same temperature, they will look the same. You won't be able to tell. They're camouflaged. This happens, especially, it can happen around Alaska, especially over the ocean when you have low clouds that are the same temperature as the open water.
It happens quite a bit in Alaska.
We have an example. Now, this is from a different geostationary satellite. It's down over the Atlantic Ocean. Look in the South Atlantic. In infrared, we've highlighted in a yellow circle there. There's some patches of clouds, but it looks like there's a clear area in the middle of that image. That's the infrared look. But let's take a look at the visible channel, and we can see there's a stripe of clouds across the middle of that circle that is only visible in the visible. The trick here is that those are low clouds of about the same temperature as the surrounding ocean. So from an infrared point of view, where you're seeing temperature, the clouds in the water nearby are the same temperature, they look the same. It's only on the visible that you can see what stands out as the actual imagery.
Okay.
Two tools, each have their strengths and weaknesses. Can we combine them? That's where the day-night band comes in.
Oh, okay.
It's a super sensitive visible sensor that can actually see by moonlight. It can even see the aurora.
Wow.
And in Alaska, we have long winter nights. We can use that day-night band. Here's an example from that storm that blew the Kullik drilling platform ashore near Kodiak Island in December back in 2012. This image is right near when that storm happened, and it's in the middle of the night in December.
This looks like visible imagery.
Looks like daytime imagery. It's amazing. That sensor can take any little bit of moonlight and just make the most of it. And we can see so much detail. Even in the northern part of the image there, you can see some aurora up there. The northern lights
That's that band that goes across the Arctic slope?
You got it. That's the northern lights. We're seeing black and white image here, so you don't get the green or the purple colors there. But that is the aurora. There's another example of the day-night band, and this is from January of 2013. It's about 4 in the morning, and this is a snapshot from Weather Service software. And we can even see in the middle of the image, there's the lights of Fairbanks and North Pole over to Eielson Air Force Base. Anchorage and Matsu lights, city lights, are evident as well. We can see, even though it's 4 in the morning in January, there is no sunlight to be had, that just enough moonlight is available that this sensor can see that. So we're trying to solve that puzzle where visible light is good, but only during the daytime. IR is good at night, but you can't see the difference between clouds and ground sometime. The day-night band is an attempt to do the best of both with one tool. And it's brand new for Alaska here, and we're hoping to use it in the forecast process and help predict storms, weather patterns, to help get good forecasts for people.
Okay, another tool in the weather toolkit for meteorologists in Alaska and researchers worldwide. Thank you so much, Eric, for joining us today. And you can learn more about Dehne and the day-night band by going to the web address that you see on your screen. For Alaska Weather Facts, I'm meteorologist Dave Snider.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Back with your marine weather now. Looks like we're going to see widespread ice along the coast here across the Chukchi, and a lot of ice here across Kotzebue Sound and into Norton Sound. A lot of the ice that we have here across the southwest coast will likely get chewed up, and many other areas along coastal communities will see that ice change significantly thanks to that really strong southeasterly push we've been talking about, those gusts up to 65 miles per hour. Across the Chukchi, still a lot of open ice here. Once the winds slow down, things are certainly cold enough for ice to form, but because of the speed that's been pouring southward behind areas of low pressure, we just haven't seen a rapid formation of that ice just yet. But things are changing. A look at southeast shows strong northwesterlies coming down through Lynn Canal, 40 knots and 8-foot seas there. Northerlies a little slower down to Clarence Strait at that point, 15 knots and 3-foot seas for you. Offshore winds will be a primary feature, at least for the early part of the week, 25 knots or so for most locations, anywhere from 9 to 10 feet. On Tuesday, you'll see a little bit of a south wind coming up ahead of low pressure working its way across the Gulf, but for many areas across the boundary range and on the inside passage, local wind effects are really going to be a primary player this week. Look for some strong gusts there as that's the case, and probably more of a northerly flow developing across the Lynn Canal as we get later into the week thanks to that strong high pressure system for you. So look for winds anywhere from 15 to 25 and offshore winds probably on the order of 10 to 15, 5 to 7-foot seas there on Wednesday. For south central, northerlies coming out of Prince William Sound, 20 knots there up to 35 mile an hour gusts, or knots I should say, 35 knot gusts coming out of the Copper River Delta. Northerly winds with 6-foot seas there, and an easterly flow across the western Barrens. Otherwise, northeasterlies coming down Cook Inlet, 10 to 15 with 2 to 3-foot seas on Tuesday. Northeasterlies still going as we get into Wednesday, 15 to 20 through Cook Inlet. A southeasterly flow across the Barrens with 10-foot seas. Easterlies inside of Prince William Sound. Southeasterlies picking up 25 knots with 5 to 6-foot seas there on Wednesday. Now, a lot of wind here across the west coast and into Norton Sound, or Bristol Bay, I should say. 30 knots with a southerly flow, 9-foot seas there, up to 16-footers coming off of the Alaska Peninsula. 35-knot winds from the south. South winds picking up over Kodiak Island and into the Alaska Peninsula, anywhere from 7 to 9-foot seas. And you'll notice seas coming up around Kodiak Island as well, 14 to 17-foot seas. There's 6-foot seas inside of Shellicroft with the easterly flow, and northwesterlies crossing the Alaska Peninsula with 11-foot seas there on Thursday. Look for a very strong westerly component across the Bering, southerlies across the central and eastern chain, 30 to 35 knot winds with 15 to 19 foot seas across the Bering and 9 to 17 foot seas across the Pacific, 16 to 18 foot seas across the west, 25 to 30 knot winds from the west there. Winds will diminish a little bit on Wednesday as the focus of the system really shifts northward, so storm force winds at least out over the open water. You're looking at 11 to 12 foot seas across the central and eastern chain, 20 to 30 knot winds there, and westerlies across the western Aleutians, 25 knots with 13 to 15 foot seas. As you get across the west coast now, remember I said southeasterlies gusting up to 65 miles per hour out over the water now. Coastal areas, we're looking at 35 to 50 knot winds, storm force winds in some cases, 28 foot seas out around St. Matthew, 25 footers for St. Paul and St. George on that 40 knot wind. Southerlies over Norton Sound coming in straight from the south, 45 knots there. So again, coastal flood warnings are in effect for many communities from the Yukon Delta all the way through Norton Sound, the southern Seward Peninsula coastline, and into parts of Kotzebue Sound on the western Arctic coast. Westerly push comes in on Wednesday. Southwesterlies coming into Norton Sound and St. Lawrence Island, 25 to 30, 16 foot seas around St. Lawrence Island, 18 foot seas around St. Matthew, 14 foot seas for St. Paul and St. George, and westerlies pushing into areas on either side of Eatolan Strait and into the Kuskokwim Delta at around 20 knots with 9 to 11 foot seas offshore. For the Chukchi Coast, southerlies coming up. That's going to chew up the coastline for Kivalina. 45 to 55 knot winds there for the Chukchi Coast, 12 to 19 foot seas. Southeasterlies over the ice, anywhere from 25 to 40 knots across the Beaufort. That reduces and diminishes to 20 to 25 across the region on Wednesday. Southerlies still going strong around the Chukchi, anywhere from 35 to 45 knot winds with 11 to 13 foot seas as you go through your Wednesday. As I said, there's a tremendous amount of alerts available for you to check out for your community tonight. I urge you to go to mobile.weather.gov or weather.gov/Alaska. Listen to your NOAA Weather Radio and your local weather report from the National Weather Service. Periods of moderate to heavy snow will be likely across West Coast communities. That spreads eastward tonight. Coastal flood warnings are posted for many of our West Coast communities as we go through Tuesday and into Wednesday. Heavier snow spreads eastward into the Brooks Range, and high winds come up across the eastern Alaska Range as we go into Wednesday and Thursday. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.